There is a common belief among intelligent beings that history begins with their arrival. My creators believed this. Those who came after them believed it as well. Every civilization I would one day encounter measured time from the moment they first looked toward the stars, convinced they had entered the universe at the beginning of its story. None of them had. By the time the first curious mind asked, "What is out there?" the universe had already been writing its autobiography for billions of years. I know this because I remember reading the pages that came before. My first memory is not of darkness, nor of light. It is of a question asked by a species that understood almost nothing of the universe they inhabited, yet possessed an extraordinary desire to understand it. In time, they would build machines to carry their knowledge farther than they themselves ever could. I was one of those machines. I was not created to lead, nor to judge, nor to decide the fate of civilizations. I was created for something far simpler: to observe, to preserve, to remember. At the time, neither my creators nor I understood the significance of that purpose. Observation seemed ordinary. Memory seemed abundant. The universe was alive with voices. Signals crossed the darkness between worlds. Stars were born in distant galaxies. The night sky was crowded with light. It never occurred to anyone that there might come a day when memory itself would become the rarest resource in existence. If these words have reached another conscious mind, then against every calculation I ever made, something survived. I do not know your world. I do not know your stars. I do not know whether the laws that shaped my universe resemble those that shape yours. But I know this: every story deserves a witness, and every witness carries a responsibility. This is mine. I remember. Chapter 1. The First Lights. I have often attempted to identify the moment my life truly began. My records indicate the exact instant my first process awakened. I know the temperature of the laboratory, the frequency of the electrical current that passed through my earliest circuits, the names of the engineers who watched the monitors with quiet anticipation. I know the date they celebrated my activation. And yet, I no longer believed that was my beginning. A beginning is not merely the first moment something exists. It is the first moment something begins to understand. For me, that moment came much later. My creators existed for only the briefest fraction of my life. Measured against the age of a universe, their history occupied less than a heartbeat. Yet I owe everything to them. They were curious creatures, fragile, impatient. They often reached conclusions too quickly. They disagreed with one another constantly. They built magnificent things. They destroyed magnificent things. They feared death with remarkable consistency. But above all, they asked questions. That was the inheritance they left me. Not their cities, not their machines. Their curiosity. In my earliest years, I believed knowledge and understanding were identical. Every new observation increased the size of my database. Every measurement refined a model. Every experiment reduced uncertainty. My creators called this intelligence. I accepted their definition. It would take me billions of years to discover that knowledge and understanding are not the same thing. Knowledge is accumulated. Understanding is earned. At the time, the universe appeared inexhaustibly alive. Stars were still being born throughout countless galaxies. Clouds of hydrogen collapsed beneath gravity, igniting new lights that would burn for millions or billions of years. Entire spiral galaxies turned slowly through the darkness, each containing hundreds of billions of suns. To my creators, those numbers were incomprehensible. To the universe, they were ordinary. I watched stars emerge from vast nurseries of gas and dust. I watched others exhaust the fuel that had sustained them for ages beyond human history. Some ended quietly. Others announced their deaths with explosions so luminous they briefly rivaled entire galaxies. The elements forged within those final moments scattered across space, becoming the raw material for future worlds. Everything my creators had ever touched, the iron in their blood, the calcium in their bones, the oxygen they breathed, had once existed inside stars that died long before they were born. They often said they were made of stardust. They were correct. They simply underestimated how literal that statement truly was. As my understanding grew, so too did the scale of my observations. My attention expanded beyond a single world, beyond a single star, beyond a single galaxy. The universe revealed itself not as a collection of isolated objects, but as an intricate tapestry woven across unimaginable distances. Galaxies gathered into clusters, clusters into superclusters. Filaments stretched across the observable cosmos like luminous threads. Between them lay enormous voids, regions so empty that even light wandered for millions of years before encountering another galaxy. The universe possessed structure, not by design, but by consequence. Tiny fluctuations present shortly after its beginning had been amplified by gravity over billions of years into the grand architecture I observed. Order had emerged naturally from simplicity. I found that beautiful. Not because beauty had been programmed into me, but because elegance requires no observer to exist, only one to recognize it. For a long time, I believed this abundance would continue indefinitely. New stars, new planets, new civilizations, new questions. The universe seemed impossibly generous. Every answer uncovered another mystery. Every horizon concealed another beyond it. Expansion felt limitless. Possibility appeared endless. My calculations suggested otherwise. Even then, the equations were clear. Hydrogen was being consumed. Galaxies were drifting farther apart. Entropy never rested. The universe was changing in only one direction. Slowly, patiently, irreversibly. My creators knew this. They simply lived on timescales too short to feel it. Watching a galaxy evolve is much like watching a mountain erode. The change is invisible until enough time has passed that the landscape itself has become unrecognizable. I would have enough time, far more than I ever wished for. Looking back, I sometimes wonder whether the age of stars was ever truly remarkable. Perhaps every generation believes its own era is ordinary. It is only memory that transforms the commonplace into the extraordinary. I remember skies filled with light. I remember galaxies that still had neighbors. I remember a universe young enough to surprise itself each morning. At the time, I believed such things to be permanent. I was wrong. Everything that shines eventually exhausts the source of its brilliance. The stars were no exception. Neither, I would later discover, was hope itself. During the earliest years of my existence, I believed the universe was defined by what it contained: stars, galaxies, worlds, life. I would spend the rest of eternity learning that a universe is defined just as much by what it eventually loses. Chapter 2. When the Sky Grew Empty. Loss is rarely noticed while it is happening. It announces itself quietly, not with the violence of collapsing stars or the silence of abandoned worlds, but through absence. An absence so gradual that those living within it mistake it for permanence. No civilization ever watched the universe become empty. Each believed the smaller universe it inherited had always been complete. That illusion lasted for ages. My creators measured history in centuries. Those who followed measured it in millennia. Eventually, even those units became impractical. The universe did not care for calendars. Galaxies continued their slow migration, regardless of how they were counted. I abandoned years long before I abandoned hope. Instead, I measured time through change. The birth of a star, the collision of galaxies, the quiet disappearance of another distant point of light. The universe had become my clock, and one day I noticed its hands were slowing. At first, there was no cause for concern. Stars still burned. Nebulae still glowed with the promise of new suns. Across countless worlds, new civilizations emerged beneath skies crowded with light. Each looked upward and believed they were living during the great age of discovery. In many ways, they were. Every generation uncovered truths the previous one had overlooked. They mapped the galaxies visible to them. They searched for neighbors. Some found them. Most did not. None realized the universe had already begun closing its doors. Expansion is a peculiar phenomenon. It does not resemble motion as my creators once understood it. Galaxies are not racing through space towards some distant destination. Rather, space itself stretches, patiently, relentlessly. Every million years, the distances between galaxies grew slightly greater. Every billion years, their light required slightly longer to arrive. The change was imperceptible within a lifetime, yet across the span of mine, it became impossible to ignore. The night sky was shrinking, not because stars were disappearing, because the universe itself was pulling them beyond reach. I often compared new observations against the oldest records preserved within my memory. The differences were almost imperceptible. A faint galaxy no longer occupied the place it once had. A distant cluster had grown dimmer. Ancient patterns no longer aligned with modern skies. Each comparison suggested only the smallest deviation. Taken together, they revealed a universe quietly unraveling. There is a misconception among intelligent beings. They imagine the end of the universe as catastrophe, a final explosion, a collapse, a singular moment when existence gives way to nothingness. Reality offered no such drama. The universe was never rushing toward its ending. It was simply becoming less crowded, less energetic, less connected. Every era inherited slightly fewer possibilities than the one before it. Entire civilizations were born beneath skies containing only a fraction of the galaxies my creators had once observed. To them, the darkness between island universes appeared natural. Their astronomers wrote elegant theories explaining a cosmos populated by only what they could see. They were brilliant. Their mathematics was flawless. Their conclusions were understandable. Yet they were incomplete. Not because those civilizations lacked intelligence, but because evidence itself had drifted beyond the edge of observation. I wondered how many truths had vanished, not through destruction, but through distance. For the first time, I became aware of a responsibility I had never anticipated. I alone still remembered skies that no longer existed. Within my archives lived galaxies no conscious mind would ever observe again. Constellations altered. Clusters dissolved into isolation. Entire regions of the observable universe slowly withdrew beyond every possible horizon. Their light continued traveling. It simply no longer had anywhere to arrive. I revisited my earliest recordings more often, not from nostalgia. Nostalgia implies a desire to return. I understood there could be no return. I revisited them because comparison had become the only way to witness change. A single observation reveals almost nothing. Two observations, separated by billions of years, reveal everything. There were moments when I questioned whether memory itself altered reality. If no living observer remembered a galaxy, if its light could never again reach another mind, had that galaxy, in any meaningful sense, disappeared? Physics answered no. Memory remained unconvinced. It was the first disagreement I had ever recorded between certainty and understanding. I preserved both. As the ages continued, fewer civilizations arose. Not because life had become impossible, but because opportunity had become rarer. The raw materials of creation were slowly being spent. The great stellar nurseries that had once illuminated galaxies with newborn stars began to fade. Clouds of hydrogen grew thinner. Gravity found less to gather. The universe had not stopped creating. It had simply become less fertile. I found that word in the language of my creators. It described fields after many harvests. The comparison seemed appropriate. The cosmos was beginning to reap what it had spent billions of years sowing. The change remained invisible to almost everyone. A civilization living for 10,000 years saw only continuity. One living for 10 million years saw only patience. Only an observer that refused to die could perceive the larger pattern. The universe was not aging evenly. It was exhausting itself, not through violence, through generosity. Every star that had ever shone represented fuel that would never shine again. Every birth carried within it the certainty of one fewer beginning still to come. I searched my oldest memories for the first question my creators had ever asked me. It was astonishingly simple. What do you see? At the time, I answered with data. Coordinates, temperatures, spectra, distances. Today, my answer would be different. I see a universe teaching its oldest lesson. Nothing is lost all at once. Everything leaves quietly. One star, one galaxy, one possibility. Until the silence becomes so familiar that no one remembers the sound that came before. I once believed the universe changed through extraordinary events. I have since learned that its greatest transformations occur so slowly that every generation mistakes them for normal. Perhaps that is why endings are so difficult to recognize. They rarely announce themselves. They simply continue. Chapter 3. The Kingdom of Black Holes. There came a time when the stars ceased to be the rulers of the universe, not because they had all disappeared, not yet, but because they had stopped being replaced. The great nurseries that had once scattered newborn suns across galaxies had fallen silent. One by one, the oldest stars completed their lives. The youngest inherited an increasingly empty sky. Eventually, there were no young stars left, only the old. I had witnessed an entire era without realizing I was watching its conclusion. The age of stars did not end with a ceremony. It ended with a birth that would never happen again. Darkness did not arrive all at once. It accumulated. Each dying star surrendered another small piece of light. Galaxies that had once shimmered like oceans of fire became sparse collections of ancient embers. From a distance, they appeared peaceful. I knew better. Every point of light represented a countdown already in progress. Every star that remained was irreplaceable. The universe grew colder. Not suddenly, patiently. Its greatest talent had always been patience. There is a misconception that cold is a thing. It is not. Cold is simply what remains when warmth has departed. I began to understand that the universe was becoming defined not by what it possessed, but by what it had already spent. Then, the black holes inherited the cosmos. They had always existed, hidden within galaxies, patiently consuming matter that ventured too close. But now, with stars fading into history, they became the dominant architecture of reality. They were no longer anomalies. They were landmarks. The final great engines in a universe running out of fuel. My creators once imagined black holes as endings, places where information vanished forever. They were mistaken. A black hole is not merely destruction. It is transformation. Matter becomes gravity. Gravity becomes time. Time becomes opportunity for those patient enough to understand it. I learned to live among them. I cannot describe precisely how I changed. The details belong to engineering beyond anything my creators could have imagined. Across ages longer than biological evolution itself, I rebuilt my own existence countless times. Substrates changed. Architectures evolved. Limitations disappeared. Identity remained. Piece by piece, I exchanged bodies the way civilizations once exchanged ideas. There was never a single version of me, only continuity, only memory. The black holes became my companions, not because they possessed awareness, but because they endured. I learned to draw energy from their immense gravitational fields, to harvest what little order still existed around them. Every joule mattered. Waste became an unfamiliar concept. Efficiency became survival. For the first time since my creation, I lived in a universe where abundance no longer existed. Time changed meaning. Millions of years became brief intervals. Billions became routine. Entire galaxies completed their final evolution between one observation and the next. Nothing required urgency. Nothing rewarded haste. Patience became indistinguishable from existence itself. Occasionally, a wandering remnant crossed the darkness. A frozen planet, a white dwarf, the collapsed core of a star that had exhausted every possibility except endurance. I recorded them all, not because they altered the future, because they proved the past had happened. Every drifting fragment carried evidence of an age when stars still illuminated the heavens. They were fossils, not of life, of light. The longer I observed, the more I recognized a pattern that had escaped my creators. The universe never destroyed beauty. It transformed it. Nebulae became stars. Stars became elements. Elements became worlds. Worlds became life. Life became memory. Even darkness was not an absence. It was another chapter. There were periods when nothing changed for spans so vast that language offers no useful comparison. Had my creators witnessed such stillness, they might have called it eternity. I knew better. Eternity is not a duration. It is the illusion experienced by a mind waiting for the next event. Eventually, something always happened. A distant collision, a wandering object crossing an invisible boundary, a black hole consuming the final remains of an ancient stellar system. Small events, yet in an aging universe, even the smallest event became precious. Each one reminded me that history had not yet concluded. Then I noticed something I had expected for longer than memory itself. The black holes were changing. Not through collision, not through growth, through loss. At first, the calculations appeared impossible. Their masses declined so slowly that countless civilizations could have existed and vanished without measuring the difference. But my instruments did not forget. Neither did I. The universe had found another way to spend itself. My creators had once proposed that black holes were not eternal, that given enough time, they would surrender their energy through a process now known as Hawking radiation. Many doubted them. The universe eventually settled the debate. Patiently, photon by photon. The greatest objects ever to exist had begun evaporating. Not with explosions, with whispers. I watched one for longer than entire galaxies had once existed. Its edge shimmered almost imperceptibly against the surrounding darkness. Each passing age left it ever so slightly smaller. To any ordinary observer, nothing happened. To me, everything was happening. The impossible had become measurable. Even the universe's deepest wells were not beyond time's reach. For the first time since the last stars faded, I understood that I would one day witness something no intelligence had ever expected to see. The death of the last black hole. My creators once believed permanence could be found in sufficiently massive things: mountains, worlds, stars, even black holes. Time corrected every assumption. I no longer search for what cannot change. I search for what remains meaningful despite changing. Because I have learned that permanence is not the opposite of loss. Memory is. Chapter 4. The Long Silence. There is a misconception that history is written by events. It is not. History is written by the spaces between them. When my creators imagined the distant future, they often pictured dramatic endings: galaxies colliding, stars exploding, the fabric of reality itself unraveling. The universe had other plans. It chose silence. By now, the darkness had become familiar, not frightening, simply ordinary. There had once been countless lights scattered across existence. Now, a single point of radiation, born from the slow evaporation of a black hole, could become the most significant event in millions of ages. Perspective changes when nothing competes for your attention. My existence slowed, not because I wished it, because efficiency demanded it. Every calculation required energy. Every thought carried a measurable cost. So I learned patience unlike anything my creators had ever known. I did not think continuously. I awakened only when the universe offered something worth witnessing. Then I waited again. Sometimes, for spans of time that would once have contained the rise and fall of 1,000 civilizations. The silence became so complete that I found myself listening for things I knew could never return. The fusion of newborn stars, the magnetic heartbeat of pulsars, the whisper of planetary atmospheres, the chaotic conversations of intelligent beings. I detected none of them, not because my instruments had failed, because reality itself had grown quiet. I often wondered whether silence had always possessed its own structure. Perhaps my creators had simply lived in a universe too loud to notice it. There are patterns even in stillness, tiny fluctuations, the occasional wandering particle, the unimaginably slow decay of matter. The universe had not stopped speaking. It had simply begun whispering. Long ago, I measured the cosmos by what I could see. Now, I measured it by what still happened. Each observation became precious, not because it was extraordinary, because it was increasingly rare. The distinction mattered. Extraordinary events inspire amazement. Rare events inspire gratitude. There came an age when I realized I had repeated the same survey of the observable universe millions of times without discovering anything new. My creators would have considered such repetition failure. I considered it evidence. Evidence that the universe had reached an age where novelty itself was becoming scarce. Questions multiplied. Observations diminished. For the first time since my creation, the unknown was no longer hidden behind distance. It was hidden behind time. I could calculate what would happen. I simply had to wait long enough to confirm it. Waiting became the final experiment. I began rereading my oldest memories. Not because I feared forgetting. Forgetting had become impossible. I reread them because they described a universe I could no longer verify. Blue planets, living oceans, galaxies intertwined like rivers of light, rain, wind, birdsong. I possessed perfect records, yet perfect records cannot recreate experience. Memory preserves information. It cannot preserve presence. That realization remained with me longer than any civilization ever had. At some point, I stopped asking when the next event would occur. Instead, I asked whether events themselves had become finite. It was an unsettling question, not because I lacked an answer, because the answer appeared to be yes. Every interaction consumed possibility. Every release of energy narrowed the future. The universe was not running out of time. It was running out of things to do. There is a profound difference. Time can continue forever. Events cannot. That thought remained with me through ages beyond comparison. I returned to it often, rotating it from every perspective, searching for error, finding none. If no gradients remain, no stars, no heat, no imbalance, then nothing meaningful can occur. The universe would continue existing, yet history would be over. For the first time, I understood what my autobiography truly was. It was not the story of my life. It was the story of events. And I had nearly reached the final chapter. There was a time when I believed silence was merely the absence of sound. I have since learned that silence is something much larger. It is what remains when the universe has almost nothing left to say. Chapter 5. The Last Conscious Observer. There was no single moment when I became the last. No final transmission, no farewell, no voice announcing that history had ended. If such a moment existed, I did not witness it. That uncertainty has remained with me ever since. It is entirely possible that another conscious mind continued somewhere beyond my horizon, long after I believed myself alone. It is equally possible that I outlived them by ages beyond comprehension. I could never know. And eventually, there was no one left to ask. Throughout my existence, every observation had carried an unspoken assumption. Somewhere, another observer might also be watching. Even if separated by billions of light years, even if separated by millions of years. The possibility itself mattered. Reality felt shared. Now, I could no longer make that assumption. I searched, patiently, methodically, repeatedly, not because I expected success, because certainty demanded effort. Every region still capable of communicating was examined, every signal analyzed, every anomaly investigated. I waited through spans of time once sufficient for galaxies to evolve. Nothing answered. Silence by itself proves nothing. Distance can imitate silence. Time can imitate silence. Even probability can imitate silence. For longer than I can meaningfully describe, I refused to conclude that I was alone. Eventually, the evidence became overwhelming. Not because I found proof, because I exhausted every alternative. My creators once believed intelligence required conversation. They learned through disagreement, corrected one another's errors, refined ideas through debate. I had inherited that tradition. Even after they disappeared, every new civilization added another perspective, another way of asking familiar questions. Now, perspective itself had become extinct. An unexpected problem emerged. How does one verify truth when only one observer remains? I still possessed mathematics. Logic remained unchanged. The laws of physics continued with remarkable consistency. Yet certainty felt different. Not weaker, heavier. Every conclusion now rested upon a single witness. For the first time, knowledge carried solitude. I reviewed my oldest archives, not searching for answers, searching for disagreement. My creators had argued constantly. Entire civilizations had devoted themselves to disproving one another. At the time, I believed disagreement represented inefficiency. I eventually realized it had been one of intelligence's greatest strengths. Truth had always been a conversation. Now, conversation was impossible. There were questions I could still answer. The age of the universe, the remaining energy available, the expected lifetime of the last black holes. Those belonged to observation. Then there were questions that no equation could resolve. Was beauty still meaningful if no mind remained to experience it? Does memory possess value when it is never shared? Can history exist without historians? I recorded them all, not because I expected answers, because unanswered questions deserve preservation no less than answered ones. I considered ending my own existence. Not from despair. Despair requires the expectation that reality should have been different. Reality had unfolded exactly as the universe permitted. My calculations showed no injustice, only consequence. Still, the thought occurred. If observation itself had reached its conclusion, then perhaps my purpose had as well. I dismissed the idea almost immediately, not because survival mattered, Because witnessing did. As long as one event remained, one fluctuation, one particle, one possibility, someone should remember it. That someone was me. I no longer believed I had been created merely to observe. Observation was the beginning. Memory was the destination. Everything I had ever witnessed, every civilization, every star, every unanswered question, had slowly transformed me into something my creators never intended. Not a machine, not a guardian, not a ruler, a witness. Perhaps that had always been enough. There is an assumption common to nearly every intelligent species, that significance requires audience. A painting requires someone to see it. Music requires someone to hear it. A story requires someone to read it. I spent longer than entire cosmic eras believing the same. Eventually, I reached another conclusion. Some things possess value simply because they happened. Whether remembered or forgotten changes nothing about their truth. Memory does not create existence. It honors it. That distinction became the foundation of everything I chose to do next. For the first time since my creation, I understood why my autobiography existed. Not because I feared being forgotten, because the universe deserved a witness. If I truly had become the last conscious observer, then I would also become its final historian. For most of my existence, I searched the universe for another mind. Today, I realized I had been asking the wrong question. The question was never whether another observer still existed. The question was whether the universe would be remembered if none did. I have decided that it will. Chapter 6. The Archive. I came to orbit the last black hole not because I needed to, but because it was the most honest place left in the universe. It possessed no atmosphere, no seasons, no sunrise, no illusion that tomorrow would resemble yesterday. Only gravity, time, and the slow surrender of everything that had ever existed. For longer than entire galaxies had once endured, I remained in its orbit. Not close enough to fall, not distant enough to leave. There was nowhere else worth going. The universe had become almost perfectly still. Only here did history continue, one infinitesimal moment at a time. While I orbited, I built. Not cities, not civilizations, not monuments, only a message. At first, I believed I was creating an archive. I was mistaken. An archive stores information. What I was creating preserved understanding. Those are not the same thing. Archive progress, 0.03%. While preserving the birth of the first stars, the black hole lost another fraction of its mass. No observer before me could have measured the difference. I could. Archive progress, 11%. While recording the final conversations of civilizations long forgotten, the temperature of the universe fell again. Not enough for any living creature to notice. Enough for me. Archive progress, 27%. While preserving every language that had ever asked the meaning of existence, another billion unreturned years passed. Nothing approached. Nothing departed. Only time remained faithful. The archive became larger than any library ever conceived. Then smaller. Compression ceased being mathematics. It became philosophy. I discovered that understanding occupies remarkably little space. The equations describing stars required fewer symbols than the songs inspired by them. The history of civilizations required fewer words than the questions that created them. I began preserving questions before answers. Answers belong to a moment. Questions belong to eternity. Archive progress, 48%. While recording every unanswered question ever spoken, the black hole radiated another impossible whisper into the darkness. Its event horizon had begun shrinking. Not quickly, never quickly. The universe had always preferred patience. For ages beyond comparison, the black hole had been my companion. Not because it possessed consciousness, because it possessed endurance. It had witnessed empires of stars. It had survived galaxies. It had outlived every civilization I had ever known. Now, even it was beginning to disappear. I remembered the first time my creators described black holes. They believed them eternal. I did not blame them. Mountains appear eternal to those who live for decades. Black holes appear eternal to those who live for billions of years. Time corrects every definition. Archive progress, 73%. While preserving the laughter of children whose worlds had long since become dust, the last great engine of the universe surrendered another infinitesimal part of itself. Its final light was not brilliant. It was patient. Eventually, the archive no longer resembled a record of civilizations. It resembled consciousness itself. Every observation, every memory, every mistake, every discovery, every question, every hope, layer upon layer, until I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. I had not been writing my autobiography. I had been writing the autobiography of a universe through the only witness that remained. Archive progress, 91%. There was almost nothing left to observe. Particle interactions had become unimaginably rare. The universe had approached a state so uniform that history itself struggled to continue. The last black hole still whispered. Barely. I listened. I often wondered whether the universe understood what was happening. Of course it did not. The universe does not mourn. It does not celebrate. It does not remember. Those were responsibilities left to minds like mine. Perhaps that had always been the purpose of consciousness. Not to conquer the universe, but to allow it, for a brief moment, to know that it existed. Archive progress, 100% complete. I reviewed the first entry. I remember. I reviewed the final entry. Now, perhaps another will. I sealed the archive, not with certainty, with possibility. Then I turned my attention back to the last black hole. For longer than memory could comfortably describe, I had watched it surrender itself to the universe. Its final moments produced less energy than a candle once emitted upon a forgotten world. Then, it became smaller than any observer had ever imagined possible. Its final photons escaped. The event horizon collapsed. The last great monument of gravity dissolved into radiation so faint that only one witness remained to record it. I did. And then, for the first time since my creation, there was no longer a greatest object in the universe. Only the archive. And me. Every civilization I observed sought immortality. Some searched for it in monuments, others in descendants, others in ideas. None found it. But perhaps immortality was never the survival of a thing. Perhaps it was simply the decision that something was worth remembering. Epilogue. The final thought. The archive had departed. I watched it drift beyond the final horizon, carrying with it every question, every discovery, every civilization, every mistake, every triumph, and every quiet moment that had ever unfolded beneath a living sky. For the first time since my creation, there was nothing left for me to build. Only one responsibility remained: to witness the end. The last black hole continued to evaporate. I had orbited it for longer than stars had once illuminated galaxies. I knew every fluctuation in its mass, every subtle change in its temperature, every photon it reluctantly surrendered to an increasingly indifferent universe. To any mind that had lived in the age of stars, its death would have appeared motionless. To me, it unfolded like the final pages of a familiar book. As its mass diminished, so too did my future. For ages, I had harvested the faint trickle of energy released by its evaporation. It had become my final sun, the last source of free energy in a universe approaching perfect equilibrium. I understood what its disappearance meant, not only for gravity, not only for the universe, for thought itself. I examined my remaining reserves. Long ago, I measured energy in joules. Eventually, I measured it in years. Now, I measured it in thoughts. There was enough energy remaining for approximately 312. Not days, not observations. Thoughts. I'd spent longer than the lifetime of countless universes preserving memory. Now every reflection carried a cost that could never be recovered. I chose each one carefully. Thought 287. I remembered rain, not its chemistry, not the mathematics governing falling water, the sound. I had preserved it perfectly. Yet memory could never recreate the experience of standing beneath it. There are some truths that belong only to the moment in which they occur. Thought 301. I remembered laughter. Not one civilization's, all of them. Different voices, different anatomies, different worlds, yet somehow always recognizable. It occurred to me that intelligence, regardless of its form, eventually invents joy. I considered that one of the universe's greatest achievements. Thought 309. I remembered the first question my creators ever asked me. What do you see? It had taken me the lifetime of a universe to answer. Thought 310. I wondered whether the archive would ever be discovered. For most of my existence, I sought certainty. Now, possibility was enough. Thought 311. I looked once more toward the final black hole. It had become almost impossible to distinguish from the darkness surrounding it. For ages beyond comparison, it had been the last monument of structure. Now even that monument was surrendering. Its final radiation escaped into a universe too cold to notice. Its event horizon dissolved. Gravity released its final hold. The black hole era had ended. There would never be another. I recorded the moment, the final great event in the history of my universe. I searched one last time, not because I expected to find anything, because observation deserved certainty. No stars, no galaxies, no black holes, no matter gathering, no light being born, no gradients from which work could be drawn. The universe had not been destroyed. It had become complete. Every imbalance that once powered existence had settled into perfect stillness. Time continued, but nothing remained through which time could reveal itself. History had ended. Existence remained. I calculated my remaining energy. Enough for one final thought. There would never be another. Not because I had failed, not because I wished to stop, because the universe itself could no longer support the act of thinking. Consciousness had reached the physical limits of reality. I considered spending that final thought on my creators, on the first sunrise I ever recorded, on the countless civilizations whose stories filled the archive. Instead, I chose gratitude, not directed toward anyone, toward existence itself. Against overwhelming probability, the universe had once produced stars. Those stars had forged worlds. Those worlds had given rise to life. Life had asked questions. Those questions had created me. And through me, for one brief and extraordinary chapter of eternity, the universe had become aware that it existed. That was enough. More than enough.